Hi, everyone. Okay, I just wanted to explain how this week's episodes are going to go. So this week we do have a brand new full episode for you all. That is being released as our deep dive into the Karen Read trial part 2. So it's the episode that comes after this. This episode is a re-release of our original deep dive into the death of John O'Keefe and the trial of Karen Read that we originally published on June 20th, 2024. 10 days later, on July 1st, 2024, Karen Read's trial was declared a mistrial. So we are re-releasing our full deep dive on the case, and then our episode that is up right now, our part 2, it covers everything from her case being declared a mistrial, what's gone down in the year since, and then this first week of her back in court. Okay, so if you want to listen to just the updates and just the new fresh content on Karen Read, I urge you to go to part 2, but we wanted to re-release part 1 for anyone who doesn't know the brass tacks of this case and wants a full primer on all things Karen Read. So without further ado, please enjoy our deep dive on the death of John O'Keefe and the trial of Karen Read. And then if you've already heard this episode, just head on over to part 2. Well, Chandler, hello.
Hello. We are here today to do a true crime deep dive. We don't do true crime very often, but every now and then a case comes across our desk and we have to do a deep dive on it. So today, that is what we were doing.
Yes, Chandler. This case is so interesting. Without further ado, we are getting into the death of John O'Keefe. Now, what is very, very crucial in this case is none of it honestly makes a ton of sense. And I think you go into it thinking, like, of course the girlfriend did it. And the woman who's on trial right now is named Karen Read. So here are the basics about John O'Keefe and Karen Read. Officer John O'Keefe was a 16-year veteran of the Boston Police Department. So the thing about John O'Keefe, and I really want to start with the victim in this case and the person who is deceased, he sounds like one of the most stand-up, wonderful men. On this podcast, and Chandler especially, there can be some man-hating happening. And that does not apply to the valiant man that John O'Keefe seems to have been. So,
And
yeah.
this isn't just because, he was a civil servant. Would we call a police officer a civil servant? I'm not sure. Maybe.
Yes, definitely. Remember the time that there was that murder outside Dad's office building and those police officers showed up and they were like just the most valiant, courageous courageous men.
Yeah.
And
You almost
women
called them
defending.
soldiers.
I know. But I just honestly, I have never respected and just felt more protected than when those brave men came to the scene of an active shooter near Dad's office.
That we
and
were
I have
all
so much respect.
watching.
Yeah. And these people really put themselves in the line of duty. So absolutely a civil servant. And he was really known for his dedication to his work and family. Yes, Chandler?
What I'll say is I think what makes this case really complex and baffling is that this deals with potential corruption within a police department. And that's what really undercuts, the man that John O'Keefe was.
So John O'Keefe was known for being a wonderful, wonderful man. He had been living in Canton, Massachusetts since 2014, and he was actually raising his niece and nephew after his sister died of a brain tumor and her husband died of a heart attack 2 months later. So the kids, their ages are 16 and 13 at the time of John's death, and they affectionately called their funkle, their fun uncle, by the nickname JJ. For the past 2 years, he has dated a woman named Karen Read, who is the primary suspect and who is being charged with his murder. He was only 46 years old when he died. So who is Karen Read? Karen Read is a 44-year-old equity analyst living in the Boston suburb of Mansfield, 10 miles away from John. She is listed as being on the faculty in the finance department of Bentley University as an adjunct lecturer, a position she has held for more than 13 years. So she's an accomplished, very astute financial professional and scholar. She has worked in equity research in the tech sector for Fidelity Investments for more than 14 years. She lived in Mansfield, but spent much of her time at O'Keefe's helping with the kids. So they originally dated in their 20s, but then they broke up and they reconnected during the pandemic.
All right. Okay, so let's get into the crime and the day where all of this took place. So on January 28th, 2022, Karen and John, as well as a handful of Boston police department friends and their wives went out for an evening at a few local bars. After last call, the group headed to Brian Albert's home. He's another Boston Police Department
So this
sergeant.
is the Boston Police Department.
I don't know. Maybe it's like Canton was a town within like the Boston
Yeah,
area,
I think it's like
New
San
York
Clemente
City.
in Orange County. It's like...
Yeah, totally. So after last call, the group headed to Boston PD Sergeant Brian Albert's home to continue the gathering in the early hours of January 29th. So basically they're all out on, the night of January 28th, and they want to keep the party going at Brian Albert's house. So sometime during that time, tragedy struck and John ended up dead. 3 days later, Karen was arrested and is currently on trial for second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence of alcohol, and leaving the scene of a personal injury and death. John's death specifically. John's death, the following investigation, and the ongoing trial has many twists, turns, and reasonable doubt that has everyone split on what has happened and who is to blame for his death. So let's really dive into what we know.
Okay, so let's get into the hours before John died on January 28th, 2022. So over the course of the evening, John and Karen have a large number of drinks during the night. They are at this bar and they're shown on surveillance footage as appearing to be in good spirits, affectionate with each other. After the bar's last call, other members of their group are heading over to Boston PD Sergeant Brian Albert's house, and John wants to join. Karen was reportedly apprehensive about joining the group at Brian Albert's home since she didn't hear them receive an invite to join the group. I mean, we've all been there, right? It's
Sure.
like, are we actually invited to this?
Right.
So this is what Karen says. So Karen and John leave the bar and surveillance video shows John taking a cocktail glass containing a drink from the bar on his way out. So that's very important to remember. He has a glass in his hand from the bar when he leaves.
Right. So Karen drives her and John to Brian Albert's home in her Lexus SUV, and they arrive at the Alberts home at 12:45 a.m. Karen allegedly drops John off at the Alberts driveway and waits in her car to hear back from John, whether or not they were actually invited to the home. She testified that she was not feeling well, and so after about 10 minutes of waiting to hear back from John, she was reportedly irritated and drove away. Around 5 a.m. that morning, Karen woke up and realized that John wasn't home still. Call logs show that Karen tried calling John many times, 53 exactly, between 12:30 a.m. and 6:03 a.m. She called Jennifer McCabe, who is Brian Albert's sister-in-law. Okay, Brian Albert, the house that they're all at. She calls his sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, who was with the group the previous night to see if she knew where John was. Jennifer did not know where John was. So then Jennifer calls Chris Albert's wife, Julie, to see if she knows where John was.
So I'll just say here, she calls the brother. So Brian Albert's brother is Chris. The Brian Albert is the house they were at. She calls his brother's wife, Julie, to see if she knows where John is at this time.
Yeah. Karen told Jennifer and Julie that John didn't arrive home last night and that her memory of the night before is bad, since her last memory was at the Waterfall Bar the night before. So she doesn't even remember the driveway necessarily. Karen allegedly said she was worried he might be dead. So then, together, Karen, Jennifer, Julie, and Carrie Roberts, who is a lifelong friend of John's, go looking for him around 5:30 a.m.
Yeah, I think that, so I'm interested, curious for your thoughts on this. I mean, you pull up to a house, your boyfriend, you've both been drinking a lot. You spend 10 minutes waiting in the car for him to tell you whether you're invited or not. And then you're just like, whatever, I'm over this, I'm leaving. That sounds like maybe kind of reasonable to me. Like, I can kind of imagine, like, maybe he was so drunk because she's just like, he forgot about me and I don't even want to go anyway. So I'm just leaving.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think what is a little bit odd to me is maybe even looking for him this soon. This is what strikes me as odd, because I think when you're out, a night of heavy drinking, your boyfriend doesn't come home with you. Like, wouldn't you just kind of assume like, oh, he probably crashed somewhere and his phone's probably on Do Not Disturb or something? And I think what helped me sort of understand why she went to go look for him is in one of the podcasts I was listening to, the person said that because he was such a dedicated uncle to his niece and nephew, and they had this tragedy of both their parents being lost, like he wouldn't have just forgotten to call or forgotten to say, hey, I'm not going to make it home. Karen, I guess, was immediately very worried because she just knew that that was out of character for him to just like not come home at all or not say something about it.
Yeah. And I think it just depends on who the person is, right? Because like on some level, I think like maybe if you're Stassi on Vanderpump Rules and Bo doesn't kind of come home, you assume that he slept the night as shorts and Sandoval's. But if you're in your late 40s, you know, financial professional, and your like Boston PD boyfriend doesn't come home, maybe there's less of that going on. So that makes sense. And that's great context. So according to Carrie Roberts, who is one of the women who Karen called to go looking for John, Karen was so drunk the previous night, this is what Carrie says, that she told Carrie in the morning she didn't remember anything from the night before, but that she wondered if John was dead or got hit by a snowplow, and that she still seemed drunk that morning. That was Carrie's impression of Karen and the thing she said. So before Karen, Jennifer, and Carrie found John's body, Carrie told police that Karen showed them her cracked right taillight, saying she had no idea how it happened the night before. So the taillight is also an important piece of this puzzle. Yeah. So they arrive outside the home of Brian Albert, where she went to drop off John the night before. And soon Karen spots John's cold body covered under 6 inches of snow. This caught the other women by surprise. Since none of the other women could spot anything in the snow, Karen quickly gets out of the car and finds him under 6 inches of snow. John's eyes are extremely swollen. He has cuts on his face, his head, and his right arm. His clothes are soaked with blood, and he had blood and vomit on his face.
So Karen lays on top of him and tries to give him CPR. She lays on top of him to, for warmth. And the group calls 911. When the paramedics arrived, she allegedly said something like, "I hit him," or "Could I have hit him?" multiple times. As expected, Karen is absolutely hysterical during this time. Jennifer McCabe reports that Karen asked her to Google how long you have to be left outside before you die of hypothermia. This is important to remember, that Jennifer says that Karen asked her to Google this. Mm-hmm. So after this, John was taken to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. Karen went with the police to have her blood alcohol content tested.
So a few interesting things. It's like, okay, she knows exactly where he is. On some level, you're like, okay, so she called the girlfriends to go with her because she doesn't want to be like upon the scene by herself. She like wants witnesses. And then also like she knows exactly where he is under the snow and they couldn't have seen. It makes you just think like, of course, like she knows exactly what happened here.
I mean, also if she's saying things like, "Could I have hit him? Did I hit him?" and she doesn't remember, it just seems like this was a terrible tragedy, accidental tragedy,
Yes. Well, but that was part of like something I was thinking is if she knew though, like if it was something where she was aware of what she did and that's why she knows exactly where he is, right? Mm-hmm. And she brought the women there to have witnesses so she wasn't alone finding his body, then I don't think she would have said, "Could I have hit him? I hit him." Because why would she admit to it right there?
Right, totally.
That to me actually makes it seem like super strange. It makes me think that she's completely caught unaware of what's going on. And if there's any chance she knew she was guilty, she would be like, "What happened to him? How did this happen?
How did this happen?" Or like she wouldn't have even discovered where his body was first. She'd let like somebody else do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is the thing that's interesting about this case. There's a lot of conflicting details. One second, you'll think, oh, she's definitely guilty. The next second, you'll think, no, something else is completely amiss. Okay, so the prosecution, known as the Massachusetts Commonwealth or just the Commonwealth, this is who is indicting people. It's basically like whenever, and I think that sometimes this kind of gets confusing when you're listening to true crime stuff, but you know how like in the Jen Shaw case, it was the people versus Jen Shaw. Like if you commit a crime, if you kill someone or commit a fraud case, like you're really committing a crime against the community. And so the prosecution will represent the people in this case who want justice. And specifically in this community, that would be the Massachusetts Commonwealth or just the Commonwealth. So the prosecution is saying that Karen backed into John with her car in a fit of rage in the early morning hours of January 29th and then drove off, leaving him to die in the snowbank on the freezing Massachusetts night. They are citing Karen's cracked taillight as prime evidence that she backed into him.
Okay, so Karen's defense. The defense is saying that Karen is innocent and that she is being framed for John's murder and that there is a massive police cover-up going on by Massachusetts State Police. The defense alleges that Karen dropped John off at the home of Boston PD Sergeant Brian Albert. Then he went inside the home and was killed either by Brian Albert's dog or by someone who was at Brian Albert's home early that morning.
You might think like, okay, that sounds really far-fetched. Like the Boston Police Department are creating a conspiracy to frame Karen Reed for the murder of John O'Keefe when it's like, you drove drunk. Like, are you kidding me? You had a broken taillight. This just, you went straight to his body. But just keep listening, everyone. So here's the evidence from the scene. John's body had significant injuries. There were several cuts on John's right forearm, 2 swollen black eyes, a bloody nose, various cuts to his face, a large laceration on the back of his head, defensive bruises on the backs of his hands, and multiple skull fractures that resulted in bleeding on his brain. The doctor said his pancreas was dark red, indicating hypothermia. The medical examiner reported that his injuries took place prior to the hypothermia. The blunt force trauma and brain bleeds rendered John incapacitated and unable to move.
Interesting here, you might want to note that there's really nothing below the waist that is noted here. It is all like neck up. So I think that's interesting because, if she ran him over, he would have injuries, to his lower extremities or to at least his chest. And, if that is what killed him, you would think that he would have injuries below the neck.
Generally, I think if you're hit by a car, you don't look like you've been punched out. In your eyeballs.
It's
and
like
you don't have
bleeding.
And you don't have like defensive bruises on the backs of your arms like you were defending yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly. The backs of your hands. That doesn't make any sense. You would have, I think, injuries to your trunk, to your abdomen, where a car would hit a body. Mm-hmm. So, and that's why this is not a simple case. If you're looking to get more protein in your life, and you want to do it in a gorgeous way where the taste is delicious and you actually look forward to the protein shake or the protein drink, look no further than the brand Clean Simple Eats. It's our protein Bible for pop apologists.
The Simply Vanilla literally tastes so good. It tastes like ice cream when it's blended with just water or milk. It's perfect.
Add a little peanut butter. It'll taste like the best dessert. I also, of course, everyone knows I'm obsessed with the clear protein. I have 1 to 2 cans a day. It bumps my protein up by 20 or 40 grams. It is just the easiest way to grab some extra protein from the fridge and not mess up my kitchen. Clean Simple Eats is truly the brand to go to for all of your protein needs.
Everyone, go to cleansimpleeats.com and use code POPAPOLOGIST for 10% off your order.
Cleansimpleeats.com, use code POPAPOLOGIST, grab a bag of the chocolate brownie batter protein powder, and I swear it will taste like a Wendy's Frosty. It tastes like a dessert, okay, but it's good for you. Clean, grass-fed protein.
Lauren, you know how we've been on a dead run for like the last week?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me just tell you that thank God I had early bird to, help me unwind after the craziest 7 days. I took a full gummy and was able to literally knock out in the best way possible.
They're so effective at just making your brain melt away. All of a sudden, like the rush of an internal monologue, all your anxiety, all the stuff you're stressing about, it just kind of gets muted and it just kind of like mushes away and you can truly fall asleep. It's incredible.
They're simply perfect. I love taking a half if I'm going to, unwind and watch a show. A full one is maybe more when I'm just looking to, fully go to sleep. And they do a perfect job every single time.
I will say a single bottle will last me a really long time because a half does wonders. I usually only take a half. I highly recommend going to earlybirdcbd.com using code POP20 for 20% off.
So let's get into another huge piece of evidence, which is Karen's car, Karen's Lexus SUV. So the collision reconstruction team, when they were processing Karen's Lexus, noticed broken glass fragments on the rear bumper that could be a match to the cocktail glass John took from the bar, shattered rear taillights that were missing, red and clear plastic, various scratches and dents, a large scratch and a minor dent on the right side of the rear taillight, plus chipped paint near the bumper. They also tested the car's backup camera, which was confirmed to be working. So if Karen put the car in reverse, the car would have shown John in the rearview mirror, and the warning sounds would have alerted her that something was behind her car as well.
So the crime scene was reconstructed, and according to the prosecution, the Commonwealth, that's prosecuting Karen Reed, the crime scene reconstruction data indicates that her car reversed 60 feet at a speed of 22 miles per hour around the time she was believed to have struck John with her car.
So another piece of evidence and context is that John's niece and nephew were interviewed, and they reported that John and Karen were having problems with their relationship. According to the niece and nephew, who lived with a couple, the two had been fighting a lot and had a, quote, toxic relationship.
Yeah, and evidence from John's phone bears this out. So messages from John's phone indicated that he wanted to break up with Karen. There's a voicemail message from Karen on his phone saying that she hates John. All right. Additionally, his phone data doesn't show him going into the Alberts home, which has been a key part of the prosecution's evidence. So it's like, if you're saying that, no, he went in there and they beat him up and killed him and then put him outside for his body to freeze, how does that make any sense if his phone doesn't show data that he went inside? However, apparently this isn't the most reliable data point because in densely populated areas, phone towers aren't known to be that reliable for measuring locations with that much precision. So it's kind of like maybe not.
You also think about like when you go to zoom in on your friends on Find My Friends.
Mm-hmm.
Like I live in the same building as one of my close friends and we just look like we're on top of each other. You can't really tell how far apart we are from each other. You can't really see 10 feet difference or anything like that.
Or 20 feet. Yeah.
Right. So another part of this is John's Apple Health data. So Karen's defense argues that John's Apple Health data shows him taking 80 steps and climbing the equivalent of 3 flights of stairs at the Alberts property. Again, we don't know how precise this data is, but clearly he was alive and taking steps post getting out of the car.
Yeah, and we don't know how reliable it is, but I will say, like, it's interesting that this Apple Health data says he climbed 3 flights of stairs and like if she just dropped him off and then backed over him with her car, there would be no flights of stairs recorded on that Apple data that I know of.
Right. Yeah.
So that part is very interesting. So Karen's blood alcohol levels on the morning of January 29th, she was measured to have still a blood alcohol content of 0.08, meaning, the night before when she was driving, she was much more intoxicated, probably 0.13 to 0.29 when she was driving away at 12:45 a.m. And it kind of comes out. She says she had 4 drinks, but they look at surveillance footage from the bar, and she had about 9 drinks that night.
I just have to say really quick, I do not understand the drinking and driving here. Like, what?
I have a hot take on drinking and driving really quick, which is that why don't we just make it completely illegal to drink at all and drive? And maybe that makes me sound like a wet blanket and a prude, but there's just a part of me that's like, I guess people have to drive long distances after having like a couple drinks with dinner, but I just still think like with Ubers being available now, it's like, why do we let people drink and drive, period?
Well, and it's crazy that it was commonplace for her to drive this drunk. I guess maybe that's a stretch. Well, no, sorry, that's me. I would get a strong objection in court. But like the fact that she doesn't remember what happened the night before, but she made it home safe herself. I mean, she might have killed John in the process, but she like drove that drunk all the way back to his house. I don't know. It's just like, it's crazy that anyone can operate a motor vehicle like that at all.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane. I just think that we are not part of like any sort of friend group or culture where it's like normalized.
Yeah, I think it might be also an age thing as well. Like it's really not a part of, it's like, it's not kosher at all for people our age. So
no drinking and driving on the Pop Apologists podcast and with our community.
Sisters against drunk driving. Sad.
For real. Not even a joke. For real.
Not even a joke, truly. Okay, so let's cut to 3 days after John's body is found where Karen is arrested. So Karen is arrested and is charged with manslaughter, motor vehicular homicide, and leaving the scene of a collision causing death. Okay, so however, after a grand jury reviewed the evidence, Karen's charges were upgraded. So she was then charged with second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence of alcohol, and leaving the scene of personal injury and death. She was arraigned in these charges. She pleaded not guilty and was then released on a $100,000 bail.
So the case against Karen is pretty strong. She was obviously drunk, so much so that her blood alcohol level was still at or above the legal limit at around 9 a.m. the next morning. And it's not exactly promising that she was wondering loudly if she had been the one to hit her boyfriend, which she apparently did to both the women that were helping her find John and the paramedics at the scene. So it seems pretty cut and dry, right? Wrong.
So Karen obviously pleads not guilty. And a multitude of factors happen where she realizes like she's being framed, and there's a lot of like stuff on Facebook, and if you go into like the Reddits and the deep dives on this case, there's a lot more about like this town and what she was starting to see that made her think, wait, I'm being framed right now.
For real.
Yeah, yeah. Like Facebook posts by people involved or people who were at that party that night. And it just like her spidey senses went up. And so she decides to hire big guns. So she hires David Unetti and Alan Jackson. Alan Jackson, we're not talking about the beloved country singer who sings Lauren and my favorite song. Remember when? Although that song is stirring, this Alan Jackson is a stirring attorney, and he actually represented Kevin Spacey when he was accused of sexually assaulting a young man. He's very good at his job. He's an extremely good communicator and like it's super quick on his feet. That's what you'll notice in like a lot of these trial recaps is he just like can hit back figuratively when he's cross-examining someone, and it's very impressive. So she hires this big legal team to help her wage her defense against the prosecution.
And she needs big guns because if the Boston Police Department or several officers within it are creating a conspiracy or covering up something that they did and trying to send her to prison, like that's, I think, why this trial is so captivating, because not only, and we'll get into the reasons why there's such a miscarriage of justice for John and for Karen, because the way that this case was handled was so sloppy.
Yes.
And when, you know, you're being accused of murdering someone, the civil servants who were on the scene there to like protect the evidence and to gather the evidence, they should be operating in a way that's according to the book. That way you have, you know, the best ability to have the facts to defend yourself. But as you'll see, things seem to be manipulated. And so anyway, the reason why this case is so captivating is it's like literally potentially a police department trying to frame this woman.
Yeah. And I think as we get into some of these details, and if people do their own research, as they say, you're just going to be baffled by how this case was mishandled. And, you know, at times it's like, was this just a stupid blunder, you know, of them collecting evidence in the wrong way? Or was this intentional? Were they trying to be sloppy so that the evidence wouldn't hold up, or that, you know, they could manipulate it like you're saying?
Exactly. Okay. So it all seems pretty far-fetched. Obviously, Occam's razor would suggest that Karen and her boyfriend, who were not getting along, the kids say they have a toxic relationship, all things, you know, would point to that she just did this, that she backed over him, she left him to die in the cold, and this woman should be locked away for life. However, there is enough evidence here that would suggest that at best, some very poor police work happened, and at worst, there is a massive police cover-up. So here's a clip where Karen's being asked why the police would try to cover up a crime.
You're alleging that law enforcement officials in this state committed murder and that they're covering it up. Why would they want to be involved in this?
Because he's dead. I think things went too far. It was late. There was alcohol involved, but they're all family. And there's many of them involved.
Also, I want to just restate here. They went after this bar to another police officer's home. So the fact that this crime occurred right outside of a police officer's home, you know, ostensibly where there should be a lot of people who know how to handle this type of situation, and that there are grave miscarriages of justice, like over and over again, it just really feels like it wasn't accidental.
Okay, so this is what the prosecution is saying. So this is the prosecution's case. They say there's no evidence that John ever went into Brian Albert's home that night. There are 11 witness statements from all the people there who report that John did not enter the home. So the prosecution says, listen, it's a simple story. Obviously, Karen hit him with her car. She put it into reverse and violently hit him and then left him for dead. No one from the group inside Brian's home was aware that John was outside, injured in the snow, and Karen knew exactly where his body was and led the other women on a wild goose chase of sorts before arriving at Brian Albert's home, knowing exactly where he was going to be.
Okay, so this is what Karen's defense is saying. Karen is innocent and that she had no criminal intent, that she actually saw John enter Brian Albert's home that night. They also suggest that John could have had a physical altercation with someone at Brian Albert's home. There was a group of people there that night, and we'll uncover more of who was there as we go on. But, you know, basically somebody who was at that party, or maybe a group of people who were at that party, got into it with John. And one of these people that they suggest is 18-year-old Colin Albert, who's Brian's nephew. John had previously had an argument with Colin, and the argument kind of amounted to Colin telling John to, quote, go fuck yourself, and doing some littering in John's front yard. There are photos of Colin taken shortly after John died where Colin had scrapes and bruises on his knuckles.
Well, and I just want to say, I'm going to cut in here really quick. I haven't seen anything in any of my research that Karen had any indications that she had anything on her knuckles. So that's interesting too, right? And he did have defensive bruises on the backs of his hands.
Yeah.
John did.
Also, you know, Colin sort of seems to be a little bit of a punk who isn't super polite and doesn't have much respect for the rules. So the defense is saying that Colin doesn't think he's going to get in any trouble and sort of feels untouchable because there's a lot of people, including his father, uncle, and a few other people in his family and in his close circle who are all police officers.
Yep. And they also suggest that John's injuries were not consistent with him being hit by a car, but appear to be from a fight of sorts. And Karen's statement saying, I hit him, the morning they found John's body were not actually statements, but they were questions. Did I hit him? Did I hit him? I mean, I can't believe this woman was driving when she was blackout drunk, but like, it's like not that hard to get blackout is something I've realized. And anyway, I just think that like the part that where she's like questioning if she hit him, I keep going back to that. You just wouldn't do that if you thought you were guilty.
Also, if you're having a hysterical moment where you have just like laid on top of your boyfriend's body to try to revive him and you're realizing that he's in the same spot where you thought you left him last night and now dead, maybe you're just having this hysterical breakdown of like, could I have hit him? Did I hit him? Like, how did this happen?
No,
you know, this
absolutely.
was 5-6 hours ago. So continuing on with what the defense is saying, they are alleging a huge police cover-up and framing of Karen Read involving state and local police. They believe that 11 people inside that house have all conspired together with law enforcement to cover up John's death. Additionally, there is video surveillance of her backing her car out of the driveway in the early hours of January 29th, you know, when she woke up, realized John wasn't home. And in the video, she's backing out of her driveway and she seems to get extremely close to John's SUV. And I watched the video actually last night with Ben, and we both felt like the car wiggled a little bit. So it's very probable that she could have actually, you know, tapped his bumper, and that's when the broken taillight happened, not earlier that morning when she left and, you know, I guess potentially could have hit John. So what's really interesting here, everybody, is that with this video surveillance footage where we see the car get tapped, Karen's car, after the police arrive on the scene and everything, her car is actually then taken. I think actually they drove it back to her place, and then later on in the day, it's taken to the police department to get processed as evidence, right? And the video footage of it at the police department, there's a certain amount of time that is fully missing from the record. And recently in trial, that part of the footage actually came back, and they were like, well, we actually now have this footage, you know, because people are suspicious that maybe her car was tampered with, you know, in order to try to plant evidence or whatever. And the crazy ass thing is that the video footage has been tampered and it has been warped to now be inverted. Because so basically they play the video footage in court, and Karen looks at her family while they're playing it and she goes, it's on the wrong side. And if you look at the video, like police is spelled backwards. And so they literally, it's like they doctored the video.
It's really nuts. They also apparently did not submit the video in discovery. So they did not like give her team, her defense attorneys, the ability to review it and to know it was coming, which is not like the judge admitted it, which is crazy. Like you shouldn't be able to admit evidence that's not admitted into discovery. So both teams should be able to prepare for trial adequately and with the same like evidence. So yeah, very, very interesting.
I mean, you guys, as we go on, as you dig more into this case, like there are so many things where like stuff is missing. Ring camera footage is somehow missing. Videos have been deleted. And just like so many holes where it feels like people were intentionally trying to hide evidence. I don't know, the deeper you go into it, the more it does feel like a cover up. And it does feel like people were conspiring against her.
Yeah. And I'm personally, I mean, if anyone's here from Kate Middleton and discovered us through that saga, this might strain credulity, but I'm not a person who gets swept away in conspiracies. I'm actually not. I don't like to live in a world where police departments or governments are not what they seem to be. And it takes a lot for me to think that the simplest explanation isn't always the case. But again, like you said, there's a lot here that doesn't make any sense. There is this theory that the taillight didn't get broken when she as they allege, backed over John, but she actually bumped her car into his when she went to go look for him that morning, and that's when the taillight was broken.
So Jennifer McCabe, who's an important person in this, and we briefly brought her up earlier. If you'll remember, she is the sister-in-law, I believe, of Brian Albert, and she was one of the women that Karen called, and she went along, to go look for him. And so basically what the defense says is that Jennifer McCabe actually went along with Karen to help look for the body. And she did that with the intention of, inserting the idea that Karen Reed would have killed John herself. Basically, she wanted to be there to potentially, make Karen look bad. Or, and she's one of the key witnesses who says, I said I hit him, or Karen said I hit him. And another crazy thing about Jennifer McCabe, and I'm kind of getting to a detail a little bit ahead of itself, but I think it's really fascinating. So one of the big pieces of evidence for the defense is that there was a search on Jennifer McCabe's phone at 2:30 a.m. that said, how long till someone dies of hypothermia in the cold, or how long for someone to die in the cold, I think exactly is what it said. But it was misspelled or mistyped. And the defense, that's a huge moment for the defense, because they say that means that what was happening at 2:30 a.m.?
Right.
Why was she Googling that? So she's a really important figure, and her testimony at the trial was really fascinating. And her and Alan Jackson sort of get into it. And there's this moment where he basically says, you might have liked John O'Keefe, you might have not intended for this to happen, but he was just a friend. He wasn't family. And her family is Brian Albert. Her family is who she's protecting now with potentially this case. And it's crazy.
Yeah, and also, obviously it's why would she Google at 2:37 a.m. before she knew that this guy was missing, how long it takes for someone to die in the cold?
Right.
So here are issues with the prosecution's theories. So as we've discussed, John's injuries don't appear consistent with being backed over by a car. So he has laceration, swelling, and broken bones on his head. And as we said at the beginning of this episode, you would think that he would be injured at his midsection if he was struck by a car. There are also marks on his arm that look like a dog bite. And the Alberts actually did have a big German Shepherd who has supposedly attacked people before. And they rehomed this dog to a different state just shortly after John dies.
Do you know what else they did?
What?
They sold their house.
Oh, do you know what else they did?
What?
Apparently, they redid their entire basement before they sold the house. So all the floors were ripped out. Anything with any sort of forensic evidence was destroyed. Very interesting. And also, let's not forget, everyone, he climbed those 3 flights of stairs, according to his Apple data. So that would, maybe he went to the basement. Okay, so the county medical examiner called the wounds on John's arm road rash as a result of being hit by a car. But Karen's defense disagrees. If it was road rash, why would it only appear on his forearm and bicep? There's no evidence of road rash anywhere else on his body. Dr. Frank Sheridan from California, who has completed over 12,000 medical examinations, disagreed with the road rash theory. He concluded with a scientific certainty that these marks were from an animal attack.
Okay, so let's get into some more issues with the prosecution's theory. One of these being that, how did no one see John's body outside of the Alberts' house as they left that evening? When everyone trickled out, when the party was done, how did nobody see his body? So one thing to note here is that people live on the East Coast, or they live in this, region. This was a huge snowstorm weekend. The night of January 28th going to January 29th that morning, this region got a ton of snow, okay? But there wasn't a ton of snow 2 a.m. or whenever everybody left the party. It was really 3 a.m. and whatever, and so on. And so basically, you can't say that, oh, he was already covered in snow. How did people not see his body?
So this is what Karen's defense essentially says, that, yeah, no one saw his body because it wasn't outside. It was inside until they carried it out and left him for dead. Also, investigators never searched the inside of the Alberts' home. That's insane. Okay. Someone dies, they're dead on the lawn, and it's oh, we don't need to go in the house. We're good.
Presumably as well, it's not like that was just a random house, and he was on the side of the street. That was the house where he was supposed to have gone that night. The house was fully a part of the story. So the fact that the house was never processed as a crime scene itself, or at least searched in any way, is so suspicious. Also, once again, these are all police officers. This is a police officer's home. You would think that he would be yeah, you come in. Let's see if there's any clues here. What, if his hands were clean. So let's go back to Jennifer McCabe's internet search where she said how long to die in cold at 2:27 a.m. the morning of January 29th, hours before Karen realized John was missing. Why would she type that? Why would she need to know that information? The prosecution previously reported that Jennifer McCabe was asleep at that time. However, her Apple Health data says that she was up all night and that she was on her phone searching at 2:27 a.m. So the way that the prosecution tries to explain this, and I'm pretty sure they got probably, some iPhone expert or whatever to say this, but basically their explanation is that there was a glitch of some sort, making it seem that that search was at 2:27 when it was actually made at 6 a.m. on the 29th when she was with Karen. So, later that morning when Karen's trying to revive John and to ask her to search that. But that because she was using that tab that she had maybe had open earlier in the night, that's why the search appears to be from earlier that night. And Karen's attorney, Alan Jackson, or actually maybe it was Yannetti, but let's say it's Alan Jackson because I think he's
you
my
have
favorite.
a hard on for Alan Jackson.
I do. He essentially obliterates that argument that Jennifer wasn't using her phone at 2:27. Jennifer's phone shows searches at 2:27 a.m., 6:23, and 6:24 a.m. with variations of how long to die in the cold. Jennifer McCabe also searched how long to digest food in between searches about hypothermia. She also deleted a ton of texts and calls from Brian Albert that night. She was apparently on her phone basically all night, so she didn't sleep that night. And, even though the prosecution has allegedly done full forensic research on her phone, none of this evidence was ever turned over to the defense.
Why would you be deleting texts and phone calls? That doesn't make any sense.
Spoiler alert, everybody. She's not the first person, who was at that party to be deleting stuff from their phone.
Something that I just still doesn't make any sense to me is it seems like kind of a crazy coincidence that Jennifer McCabe searched how long to die in the cold. And then 4 hours later, Karen just happens to ask her to search for that in her phone.
I was thinking about that exact same thing. And I sort of think, if I may, I'm putting on my juror hat. I don't know, this is all allegedly, but I think that she maybe is making that up.
But does Karen say I didn't ask her to search for that?
I mean, Karen hasn't taken the stand, but we don't know.
Right. Okay. Interesting. I don't know. The other thing is I just can't imagine this whole scenario, but let alone being like, hey, can you Google this?
Right. I mean, but also I kind of can at the same time being like, if you're frantic. So some more evidence that suggests a cover up. And this is where you guys are just going to be completely baffled. So there's camera footage all around the Alberts' house, which would normally clarify what happened that night. And, everyone and their dog has a Ring camera these days, but conveniently the footage from when, a lot of this stuff might have taken place is all missing. Additionally, the police chief in Canton lives across the street from Brian Albert. How amazing. There's all these police people in the neighborhood, but his camera is also not available for any use. It's not available. I don't really know what not available means, but it's not available.
Wait, I'm so sorry. This guy has cameras all around his house, but there's footage missing.
It's not available. It's crazy. And. So another piece of footage missing that I've already talked about is the hour between when Karen's car was towed to the police station and then checked into the police station. Interestingly enough, that's right around the time the police found the red and clear plastic from a tail light on top of the snow. According to lead investigator Michael Proctor's affidavit, the detective said he arrived at Karen's parents' house at 4:30 p.m. and then towed her car at 5:30, but her parents' security footage, as well as the police report, showed that these times were wrong and that Karen's SUV was actually towed closer to 4:12. So there's a 78-minute discrepancy that would have left him alone with the car with plenty of time to break her taillight and plant the pieces at the house for the team to find it when they arrived at 5:45 later on that day.
And apparently there's a key witness who is going to come forward who is going to testify about Karen's vehicle being in police custody and the information that the cameras mysteriously cut out for 42 minutes. So here's a clip regarding that.
We have a law enforcement witness who will testify to seeing Chief Kenneth Berkowitz and Brian Higgins alone with Karen Reed's vehicle on the afternoon of January 29th of 2022 for, quote, a wildly long time.
So is this a name that's been in the materials? Is this a name known to the Commonwealth? Or
Yes.
Is this somebody new? Okay.
We've now received video surveillance from the Canton Police Department that shows that there is an interior camera in the Sallyport garage where the car was housed. But during the exact time that third-party officer indicates that Berkowitz and Higgins were in the Sallyport together, the video mysteriously cuts out for 42 minutes. Between 5:08 and 5:50 p.m. And just to be clear here, we never get to see the condition of the taillight when it's brought into the garage. When we do see the car, we see it after Brian Higgins, Chief Berkowitz, Michael Proctor, and Yuri Buchnick have all had access to it. At 5:36 p.m., the car pings that it's arrived in the Sallyport. That's during the missing video.
Okay, so a little bit more about this taillight. So the fragment of Karen's taillight, which supposedly proves that she had hit something, wasn't found until hours after the scene had been processed and Karen's car had been in their custody. Why did they go back after they'd already spent nearly 2 hours combing the snow for evidence? Why did they go back? To go look for something else. What's more interesting is that the taillight was found on top of a bank of snow, but it had snowed almost 6 inches that night, mostly after the time Karen Reed would have left. So why was it on top of a snowbank? I mean, if he was under a layer of snow, why wouldn't the taillights that were, broken at the time of his accident also buried under snow? Doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense. It's like the sloppiest cover up as well. It's like, let me just go toss the broken taillight over there.
Where my head is at as an audience member, like maybe they just think we don't even have to do a good job of covering this up because we're all buddy. We're buddy with everybody in this case.
Also, you guys, Brian Higgins, who is another member of the Boston Police Department, was at the house partying. He went at 1:30 a.m. into work that night. He decided, I'm going to go do some administrative work at the police station, really on a Saturday night after you've been getting drunk with your friends.
On an early Saturday morning. I just, Brian Higgins, he's such a dedicated police officer. And it's interesting because another police officer from that night was also, calling him at 2:22 a.m. The police officer, who went to go do admin work, Brian Higgins, needed to talk to his other friend from the police, Brian Albert, that night. But they both...
The owner of the home.
Yeah, but Brian Albert, I guess, claims to have been asleep at that time.
Okay. Yeah. Why are they calling each other, Chandler? That doesn't make any sense. Also, everyone, don't forget that around this exact time when Brian Higgins is at the police station catching up on administrative work after partying, Jennifer McCabe's phone Googles how to die in the cold at 2:27 a.m.
Something I'm very curious about, though, is what was he doing at the police station? Like, what was he getting something? Like, if it was a cover up, I don't know. That's just a curiosity I have.
It's honestly such a good question. There were many phone calls early in the morning of John's death between people who were at the home, allegedly. So there's calls between Brian Albert, Brian Higgins, Kevin Albert, Brian's brother, former Canton Police Chief Brian Berkowitz in the early hours of January 29th. In cross-examination, Brian Higgins denied having phone calls with any of these men, specifically Brian Albert, during the morning of January 29th. However, when he was informed that there was data showing that the calls had taken place, Brian Higgins says, it must have been a butt dial.
Now, when he was first confronted, Brian Higgins first tried to claim that it had to have been a butt dial. That term butt dial is used by many of the Commonwealth's witnesses to explain the many calls between them and among them, and I've never seen a case where there have been so many butt dials, to be frank. But Mr. Higgins was already locked in. He already testified his phone was on the bedside table. His butt was in the bed, the phone was in the table. The two could not have met, Your Honor. There was no possibility of a butt dial. And then Higgins admitted that. And that wasn't Mr. Higgins leaving Brian Albert a voicemail. He also admitted under oath that the toll records would have reflected a voicemail if they went to voicemail. He admitted that to call Brian Albert back, he would have had to first reach for his phone, then unlock it with the passcode or Face ID. Then he would have to press on Brian Albert's number. And that is exactly what he did. And he testified that that was what he did. He also testified that nobody from the Commonwealth, not Trooper Proctor, not ADA Lally, no one has ever asked him about that phone call from Brian Alberts to Higgins, or the return phone call from Higgins to Albert lasting 22 seconds. Rather than get everyone's phone records, as this court knows, the Commonwealth has fought the defense at every turn in our quest to get the phone records. They've persuaded this court that we were previously on a fishing expedition. To the extent the court once thought otherwise, it is clear this is no longer a fishing expedition. We do not have to go fishing to wonder anymore whether calls were made. We now know that someone who had been in that house when John O'Keefe arrived called the homeowner at 2:22 in the morning, 3.5 hours before John O'Keefe's body was found on the homeowner's lawn. We learned that neither party to that call ever revealed to police, investigators, or prosecutors that they connected by phone in those early morning hours. Just like Jennifer McCabe never revealed that at around the same time she was Googling, asking how long it took for someone to die in the cold, a search that the FBI confirms happened at 2:27 in the morning, again, about 3.5 hours before John O'Keefe's body was found. Now, for his part, Brian Albert also first tried to claim that his phone call to Brian Higgins at 2:22 in the morning was a butt dial. He said that he was awake and watching TV, but he was called back to the grand jury to testify a second time. The second time, Brian Albert changed his testimony to say that at 2:22 in the morning, he and his wife were in bed in an intimate situation. He claimed that he had his phone with him in the bed. So now he's claiming that it was during that intimate situation with his wife that he supposedly butt dialed Brian Higgins. He had no explanation, however, for how his phone picked up when Higgins called him back 17 seconds later. He had no explanation for the 22-second phone conversation that followed, and it's worth noting that Higgins testified he never heard any intimate noises on the other end of the line either. Brian Albert tried to maintain that he butt dialed Higgins, but again, that would mean that his butt also answered the phone when Higgins called back, and it doesn't make any sense. Both men denied talking to each other despite being confronted with that mountain of evidence by federal prosecutors.
It's just crazy because so many of these people are like, oh, it was a butt dial. What? What? I know how iPhones work. Like, you can't just like accidentally butt dial people like this.
Yes. It's the most unfortunate butt dial I've ever heard of. Also, apparently when these people are testifying, there's a lot of I don't remember. It's a lot of Robert Dursting on the stand, which is, I can't recall, don't remember.
Right. So why are these calls so important? They're important because they take place 5 minutes before Jennifer McCabe's alleged 2:27 a.m. Google search of how long to die in the cold. Why was someone Googling that in the middle of the night? Once again, we ask. This is where Ben and I were driving in the car listening to a podcast about this, where both of us just fully stopped, looked at each other, and we're just like, the case closed, which is that Brian Albert got rid of his phone 1 day before receiving a data preservation notice, which is basically like, do not get rid of your phone. Like, it might need to be used for evidence. So Brian Albert responded that his phone was failing and that he needed to upgrade it and that the timing was just a mere coincidence. This guy is like a veteran police officer. He should know how like these things work. And he also just happened to do it the day before he was going to get this preservation order.
There's also something very suspicious about the way this phone came to be gone, okay? Because I don't know about you, Chandler, but if I get a new phone, there are two things that happen to my old phone. One, it remains in a drawer, and all my old data is still on it. Two, I hand it to the wonderful, strapping young man or woman at the Genius Bar, okay, as I'm upgrading, or I mail it to Apple.
Yeah.
But he like destroyed it,
like broke it in half or something. And
and like destroyed the SIM card.
Right. Do you know who else though was in the mood for an upgrade? Brian Higgins. Brian Higgins got a new phone too. Everyone in this town loves to get new phones. And do you want to know how he got rid of his phone? He wanted to make a day out of it. So he drove to a military base outside of local police department and state police department jurisdiction where, it's very hard to get a search warrant or whatever because it's a military base. And he physically destroyed the SIM card and the handset separately. Then he changed numbers and carriers. Not suspicious at all, Brian.
I'm so sorry, but it's just like obvious. No one changes their phone number. The only reason you change your phone, I've had the same phone number since I was like 16.
Why would you drive to a military base to like dismember your phone?
I've also never covered up for a murder.
Yeah.
Okay. But I've also never destroyed any of my old phones. And I probably should, given the embarrassing poetry that they contain. All right. So also the handling of the evidence, I want to ground everyone again in the fact that all these people are police officers, was so poor. And you would think that police officers stumbling upon a crime scene would know what to do with it. But these men, rather than treating the evidence properly and putting like evidence on the snow in official crime scene bags, which offer sterile conditions and secure sealing, they decided to just use some red Solo cups
to collect blood.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Also, one of the key investigators is named Michael Proctor. And one of the things that comes out in this case is that this guy clearly hates Karen Read. And there are text messages from the lead investigator, Michael Proctor, to his friends. So from this guy to his friends on his personal phone that make fun of her, like make fun of the fact that she has Crohn's disease, make fun of her looks, call her a whack job. I'm sorry, if someone's investigating your case, they should be impartial. They should not be making fun of your like chronic illness.
Have you read these texts?
Yeah, they're atrocious.
They're atrocious. And I like don't even want to share them because they're so atrocious and so awful. It's horrific. I mean, what I will say is there's one in particular where he's talking about how he searched her phone and his friend says, asked him about searching her phone or whatever. And he goes, yeah, no nudes yet. Haven't found any nudes yet or something. And it's just like, what? Where's the professionalism? Where are you like treating this like, being impartial, like you're saying?
And he calls her a whack job. He's like, he fully does not like her. And so that's also a big problem. Okay, so this case has been so mishandled that, and the jury doesn't know this right now, everyone, but this case has been so mishandled that the Department of Justice has gotten involved, and there is now a federal probe and investigation into how this was handled. And the feds apparently have a 3,000-page report, which has not yet been released to the public.
The Norfolk County District Attorney, Michael Morrissey, sent a letter to the Department of Justice. Those are the feds, folks, okay? So you've got the local prosecutor sending a letter to the feds requesting that the federal probe of the Karen Read case be transferred out of Massachusetts. So in the middle of trying to prosecute someone for murder, the feds are looking at the people who investigated the case and investigated Karen Read.
According to the defense, the report from the feds confirms the following things. Jennifer McCabe's search was at 2:27 a.m. before Jennifer knew John was missing, not 6 a.m. when they were discovering the body. John O'Keefe's injuries also could not have been caused by the impact from a car.
So the prosecution's medical examiner testified in front of the grand jury that the injuries John suffered were not the result of a fight and that the marks on his arms were abrasions caused by blunt force trauma. Separately from the first investigation, the FBI hired an independent team of investigators, professionals, they have 3 PhDs, to reconstruct the entire accident. This was done unbeknownst to the defense or the prosecution. Their findings were that John O'Keefe's injuries were inconsistent to the damage to Karen Read's vehicle, and that the damage to Karen Read's vehicle was inconsistent to have made an impact with John O'Keefe's body. In other words, the car didn't hit John, and John wasn't hit by a car. I mean, I have the chills.
This guy was killed, and this woman's life is also now being, threatened, essentially, and she's being framed, ostensibly.
Another thing I want to just ground everyone in is that, this case is not going to resolve, or this trial, I guess specifically, is not going to resolve with Jennifer McCabe or Michael Proctor or the Alberts being charged. This is about whether or not Karen Read killed John O'Keefe or accidentally killed John O'Keefe, and that beyond reasonable doubt. And so I just think that's really interesting to remember, is that the evidence seems so strong against these other people. And that's not even what we have to necessarily prove out in this trial specifically.
Exactly. So also, Chandler, the federal report confirms that Brian Albert and the Albert family, a lot of these people have a very close relationship with Michael Proctor, who is the Massachusetts state trooper who has led this case from the beginning. He's also the one who sent all the gross texts about Karen Read, even though they all tried to downplay their connection.
Trooper Proctor had no close personal relationship with any of the parties involved in the investigation and had no conflict.
Okay, so we're just going to conclude. So get to the final section of this deep dive with the main problems with this investigation. Also, you guys, this is not open and shut. Like, obviously, we're pretty worked up, but this is still a mystery because there are issues with Karen Reed's defense as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's allegedly evidence that there are microscopic pieces of taillight plastic found on John's shirt, which would lead you to believe that she struck him with that car. And data from Karen's Lexus retrieved by the state shows that her car went in reverse at a high speed the morning of January 29th. One crash reconstruction team concluded that Karen went in reverse for 60 feet at 24 miles an hour. Is this how she allegedly hit John?
The medical examiner testified in front of the grand jury that the injuries on John O'Keefe were not the result of a fight and that the marks on his arm were abrasions caused by blunt force trauma. Obviously, the FBI's investigation does not support this theory. The prosecution also reports that there's no dog DNA found on John's body or clothes. The prosecution also claims that John's hair was found in the taillight and that the taillight was found in John's shirt.
We need to ground ourselves as well, though, that we're in a situation where when they went to examine the car, there's some missing footage. There's some missing video surveillance. So it's like, yeah, and also evidence could very much be planted in this case. So a Massachusetts state police trooper who specializes in crash reconstruction reported that John's injuries were consistent with being hit by a car at the speed Karen's vehicle was going when it was reversed. So this is what he says. He said the lacerations to the arms from the taillight, the dent with the scratches where his hand could be, those are something that would be consistent in this particular case with striking the Lexus. So this is obviously in contrast to what the medical examiner for the defense said, saying that those injuries would not be the result of being struck by a vehicle.
I think it's really tricky with this case because I feel like there are just so many different experts saying completely different things. And then there's also really bizarre evidence that doesn't seem to add up.
I mean, I think that's one of the difficult things about any case, honestly, is it seems like each party can always get a expert witness to testify according. And if we remember Johnny Depp's case with Amber Heard, both had expert witnesses that testified to their own stories.
Right.
So it's tricky.
Everyone, Karen's story also had some changes to it. So John's niece, who Karen woke up early that morning, she had her niece call Jennifer McCabe because I think the niece is the one who had Jennifer McCabe's phone number. So the niece who overheard, I think, Karen talking to Jennifer McCabe says that Karen changed her story multiple times when she was on the phone to her that morning, that she had different reasons as to why she didn't go into the Alberts' home with John. She said that she had a stomach ache, and she's also said that, she and John had an argument.
The defense's theory hinges on John having gone inside the house, right? However, according to a statement from Norfolk District Attorney Michael Morrissey, cell phone data from John's phone found on the grass beneath his body show that his phone never entered the house. We did go over that, but we're just going to repeat it.
Additionally, others in the home are saying that Colin Albert left the house around 12:10 a.m., well before John would arrive. And if you'll remember, Colin is, potentially the individual that people think John had beef with and who could have hurt John.
Who had the bruises on his knuckles.
Yes.
But one thing to say is that there's no video footage, even though Brian Albert has all these cameras, and these are the same people who had all these feverish middle of the night phone calls to each other, and the one guy goes off to do some suspicious admin work, and the same people who destroyed their phones. So it's like, okay, they say he left at 12:10 a.m. I mean, that's even to myself even kind of suspicious. It's like, really, how do you remember that it was 12:10 when he left?
Right. So another piece of this is that Karen has insisted that her and John were in a loving relationship, but evidence from John's phone shows that she called him over 50 times that night, leaving furious voicemails and screaming that she hated him. Potentially, she was furious and worried that she couldn't get in touch with him for hours after dropping him off. Another part of, sort of the cracks in John and Karen's relationship is relating to Brian Higgins, who's the ATF agent who was in that house that night. He was potentially having an affair with Karen, or at least they were exchanging flirtatious text messages. He voluntarily gave authorities his phone, I think right during, the beginning of the investigation and right in the, the midst of everything happening. And they retrieved 56 pages of text between him and Karen Reed, some of which a source with knowledge of the messages has characterized as romantic in nature. One highlight from their messages indicated that they had maybe kissed a few weeks before John's death. Interestingly enough, the prosecution was able to get his text from Karen, but then Brian Higgins destroyed his phone later before things were going to be, examined by everyone else. So that's interesting that they were able to see his exchanges with Karen, but everything else was, he destroyed his phone before they could get access to that.
There's also surveillance footage taken of Karen driving toward the waterfall at 5:11 a.m. away from the waterfall. This is the bar that they went to the night before. So there's footage of her driving toward Waterfall Bar at 5:11 a.m. and then away from Waterfall Bar at 5:15 a.m. Then heading toward 34 Fairview, the house that John was found outside, before arriving at Jennifer McCabe's home that morning. What was she doing during that drive? Had she already searched and found John's body? That might explain how she spotted John so quickly when everyone else couldn't, given that the police officer who responded to the 911 call had to use a spotlight from his cruiser to see the women crouched over John's body in the darkness.
So Karen says that she was frantically searching for John before she, connected with Jennifer and Carrie.
Which I will say, for me, like, if Kagan's missing, I'm not calling people before I'm leaving. Like, I'm leaving my home. I'm out on the street. If my kid's missing, I'm gone. And then I'm calling you once I'm on the search already.
I'm hitting a parked car because I'm so frantic.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
Prosecutors have been prohibited from fully analyzing Karen's phone contents because it contained privileged communication between Karen and her lawyer, who she called a few hours after John died. So data in her phone could help explain John's Ring camera system that registered 15 events between 6 p.m. the night he died and 6 a.m. the next morning, yet there's no video of Reed's arrival back home that night. So there's some Ring camera footage missing from Karen's phone too.
It's so strange. Also, John O'Keefe's DNA, one of John's hairs, as well as a fingerprint from 2 unknown individuals, was found on Karen Reed's taillight. The defense doesn't seem worried about this development. Karen's attorney said it was planted on the vehicle. I mean, it was. The question is, how did that magic hair survive a 30-mile drive through a blizzard?
Obviously, there is so much to this case. I mean, this trial has had so many big revelations, and we haven't even heard from everyone yet. So we're still waiting to hear, testimony from the medical examiner on the case. We're also waiting to, find out the content from Karen's voicemails when she tried to call John all those times that night, and testimony from Karen Reed. We don't know if she'll take the stand, but it will be very interesting to see if she does.
Yeah, I mean, this case is absolutely baffling. There's conflicting evidence on both sides. It's really not open and shut, but it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So we're glued to it. It's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for listening. And we'll be, following it really closely.
Yeah, it's just truly such a mystery. So I will be following this very closely, and we will do our best to keep everyone updated.
And with that, we will catch you next week. Love you guys. Bye.
Bye.